Sally Kirkman from sallykirkman.com, and I'm here with my friend and fellow astrologer, Christina Rodenbeck from oxfordastrologer.com, and we're here to talk to you about the astrology of the month ahead. This is our regular monthly podcast, and just a reminder that we've got a new podcast out, Astrology Talk Investigate, that comes out on the 8th of the month, and they're little short snippets investigating different things. We did the Bastille Day last month. We've got Swindlers coming up. We've got Keanu Reeves coming up. So please do take a listen to those as well. But here we are. How are we doing, Christina?
Well, we haven't quite started with our Venus retrograde, have we? But I'm feeling that very strongly. The Venus retrograde coming up in Leo. Because we're in the shadow of that, and I'm, it's good and bad. It's been quite an interesting month, hasn't it? That we're just emerging from. Just before we started the podcast, we were talking about water.
Yep, we were.
The events in water, the watery events, and including, because of the Saturn turning retrograde. And Neptune being in Pisces, both of these big planets being in Pisces seems to have had quite a big effect last month, hasn't it?
Particularly when they turned retrograde. Both planets turned retrograde. I mean, coinciding with Saturn turning retrograde in Pisces, it was the, that submarine that was going down to see the Titanic. I think it was called a submarine anyway, a little tiny capsule it looked like, which tragically got lost, exploded, and was headline news. I mean, that Saturn in Pisces just sort of, when I saw it had disappeared, I thought, this doesn't look good. Saturn turning retrograde in Pisces, it's just being almost pulled down to the bottom. It's not going to, it's not going to emerge. And that, there's that also. A few days before, there was the awful refugee ship that capsized, which was just, not headline news, was it? But I think probably they think there was 500 people died in that.
It was a disgraceful example of late stage capitalism, wasn't it? With all this hoo-ha about some people who'd been going to look at the wreck of the Titanic in a little pod called the Titan. Yeah. And of course, Titanic is like enormousness, isn't it? And Neptune in Pisces, where it's been for a long time, but it is whale-like. It's huge. It's enormous. So there was that, and contrasted with, I think it was the most people who have died at one go in the Mediterranean, the biggest tragedy. Yeah. I'm assuming also that includes ancient times or the Battle of the Nile. I'm not sure, with people really done the math on that, but many people, women and children, dying in the Mediterranean during Neptune's transit through Pisces has turned into a huge cemetery. It's quite extraordinary. And you can't help imagining the hands reaching up from the deep and pulling people under. Especially now that Saturn's here, and Saturn is, of course, the Lord of Death. He is, Father Time. He carries his scythe, and he brings death by water. Two very tragic events, and I just found it that the refugee disaster was just, it was like, let's just not talk about that. We'll talk about, the one that's, we want to put foreground. I just found that awful as well. Very sad and tragic events, both of them, but just a real, refugees, human beings. It was just wrong. It was just wrong that it was almost sort of pushed to one side. It felt like, let's not talk about that. Let's not go there. And so, also, that the other big thing about Neptune being in Pisces is that it has been remarkable how often there's a refugee story when that Neptune in Pisces bit has been highlighted. So when it's made aspects to Jupiter, for instance, we've seen lots of, when it was opposite to Jupiter, we saw all the refugees coming walking from Syria. And I'm sure that we will. And then we saw a whole lot more when it made the conjunction to Jupiter. So it is connected not just with these tragic events in the ocean, but also to do with large movements of people, it seems to me. Very vast migrations are somehow Neptune and Pisces, the board. And what is that? Why is that, you ask yourself? And that's because this is the planet with no boundaries in the place of no boundaries. It's like the borders don't count with Neptune and Pisces. And also it's interesting that Saturn is about boundaries, precisely about boundaries. But it's in the sign of no boundaries, right? Or borders. And these tragedies happened at sort of border crossings, but not the one on the Titanic, although you could say that's crossing the boundary between the earth and the water, that they were going too deep, or maybe crossing the boundary of hubris. Especially the Titanic has always been a symbol of hubris, hasn't it?
Yeah.
And supposedly the greatest ship, etc., blah blah blah, and then it just drove straight into an iceberg.
Came up against a real boundary, didn't it?
Yeah, Saturnian. I mean, I don't know the astrology of the sinking of the Titanic, but it must be something like that. I think the reason that's always been such a huge story, because other boats have sunk, but that one is such a huge story because it's such a story of human overreach.
Yeah, and now immortalized in the film.
Yeah,
Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet. I mean, I think everybody's seen it, haven't they? Huge blockbuster.
Not one of my favorite movies.
No.
I'm rolling my eyes here, and that's great actors somehow wasted, as far as I'm concerned, except for Billy Zane, who I really enjoyed in that, actually.
It's a sob fest. It's a sob fest. And then, I mean, the other thing that's been going on, which again, this sort of was when Neptune turned retrograde later in the month, was our water companies over here. Thames Water in particular suddenly looks like it might collapse. Billions in debt. So, more kind of talk about what's happening with water. And what I found interesting about this, having a look back, I mean, it was 1989 that the water companies were privatized in this country. And there was a Saturn-Neptune conjunction in Capricorn. So Saturn, the government's bureaucracy, conjunct Neptune, god of the sea, in Capricorn, and privatization kicked in. And we're back now with Saturn and Neptune, both in Pisces, and they're going to meet for the first time since 1989 in the next couple of years. So they're both back, aren't they? I mean, are they going to collapse? Is this privatization going to be shown for the scandal it is, as these two planets, again, are going to make their conjunction? Well, and the privatization of English water, because Scottish water was not privatized in the same way. I'm not sure about Welsh water. But the privatization of water was an incredibly ideological move. The Thatcher government had privatized many other things with less fuss, British coal, whatever. There was a lot of fuss about that too, because of, but this actually didn't get through Parliament several times, and they finally pushed it through in 1989 because it was so obvious to anyone thinking about it that you can't privatize a monopoly very successfully. So what they did was they broke it up into these different areas and sold it off. And it's been an absolute scandal for years, because they, I was reading about this Australian group, Macquarie, who are a huge investment group and I think they're the biggest owners of infrastructure around the world. And they bought, I think, Southern Water. Anyway, they've had a couple of water companies that they buy. They pump up the debt enormously. So they borrow huge amounts off the back of having this thing. They
steal from the pension fund, they give money to their investors, and then they sell it on. And what I found interesting, I actually read this, it's in the Financial Times, dissection of, it's called, it even is called something like the Macquarie maneuver or something, because they've done it so many times. It's piracy, which makes me again think of Neptune in Pisces. It's piracy. That's actually what they're doing. It's incredible to me that this is legal, that you're allowed to treat a pension fund like that you're allowed to pump up debt like that, and that there are no safeguards against this. And I think that's also very Piscean. And people, are realizing that this thing was privatized without proper regard to, legal measures to keep people on the straight and narrow. And this kind of worship that certain sectors of government have for privatization, that they think the private sector is going to do a better job necessarily, is it's a fallacy. They may do a better job, or they may not do a better job. It really depends on organization, not on ideology.
Going to be interesting to see what happens over the next year or so as Saturn and Neptune complete their journey through Pisces.
Well, the other part of this thing, of the water scandal in this country, is that our water is full of shit.
Yep.
That's the result of this privatization, has come round at last. So they've stolen all this money. That's the financial side. But the practical side is that they've made no investment in our sewage and in our waterways, or very little investment. And the result is pollution. And I think that's quite an interesting thing with Neptune and Pisces as well, is this overwhelming wave of pollution that we're experiencing. So I think we've talked about this before, because we're both as water signs, we're both quite obsessed with the lack of cleanliness of our water. And Sally lives in Hastings-on-Sea, where stuff is barfed into the sea all the time. And I live on the Thames, which is, Father Thames. It's one of the great rivers of this country. And it was swimmable when we first moved here 15 years ago, easily. Yeah. And my daughter used to swim in there until fairly recently. But it's just filthy. It's filthy again. And it was a famous example of a river that had been cleaned up, because it was really filthy in the 1950s and 60s. Then it was cleaned up, and now it's become filthy again.
And it's the ecosystem as well, isn't it? It's the ecosystem of the rivers and seas that's being damaged, possibly irreversibly, if this doesn't get hold of. So, it's just, I'm all with Fergal Sharkey, who's forever talking about it on Twitter, constantly retweeting what he's saying, because it's like something needs to happen, needs to change.
Fergal Sharkey was the lead singer of the Undertones, and a great campaigner he's also fly fisher, I know, campaigner for clean water here in England. And it's interesting to me that he does these two very Neptunian things. One is trying to protect the water, and the other one is singing. Music. He does music and water. That's his stuff. That's his thing. So we've been having a lot of Piscean watery stuff in the last month.
Yeah, we have. And then, obviously we're moving into Leo season, although Venus and Mars have been raising the heat in Leo. And also the other thing that's going on is crazy temperatures again, isn't it? Around, fires breaking out, intense. Probably in Southern Europe, the hottest temperatures ever. So, there's issues with water, there's issues with heat, Leo season, fire.
And the floods. There have been floods all around the world. If it's not fire, it's flood at the moment. It's quite incredible. And people think there's not a problem with climate change. People still would argue against that. It's incredible. But I think that the fire has also, there's been, Mars is no longer in Leo. Is it gone yet?
No, it's gone. It's in Virgo.
It's in Virgo. But Mars, Venus, and now the Sun in Leo Plus, I have to say, Lilith is in Leo, which is out of bounds behavior.
And Mercury in Leo. So it's been
it's been a Leo fest. That's very fiery. I mean, and you could argue, oh, well, it's Leo season every year in August, but this season particularly, it's not Leo season with Mars quite often. And the Leo season began really early this year because of the entry of Mars into Leo, which was ages ago. It was way back in early June.
It was in May, late May. Yeah. And then Venus coming in early June as well.
Then Venus came in, and then Venus is doing a retrograde. So she's not behaving like your normal Venus. She goes retrograde on the 23rd of July, but we're already well into that shadow period. She's actually been stationing at the end of Leo since mid-July.
Yeah.
And she's not all kind of peace, love, and happiness when she's retrograde.
No, she's not. She's a warrior, Venus. She's always, she was a warrior woman, Venus in mythology. That often gets forgotten. That, we think Venus is so sweet and kind, but she's warrior woman. So those Leos, what are we thinking about the Leos then? I have to say, I've got to give you one really, you're going to go, oh God. There's been more Leo Love Island winners than any other star sign. Just... Christina's horrified now. I just read that recently. Leo the performer likes to take center stage, show off. So there we go. That's one bit of Leo trivia for you.
Leo rules the heart as well. I have actually watched Love Island, so I'm not speaking of it with out of ignorance, because one of my children loves Love Island. So
I was about to say, if you've got a teenage daughter, at some point you will have it on constantly throughout the summer. So we can't miss out on that. But the sign, it's the sign of royalty as well, isn't it? There's and you often find an acting, some great Leo actors. I love Helen Mirren, who played the Queen. They often end up in these royal roles. And also the other one I love is Elizabeth Moss, who's the lead in the Handmaid's Tale. She was called the Queen of Peak TV because she's won so many Emmys and Golden Globes. So there's this kind of regal edge to them as well, isn't there, the Leos?
Yeah. And even if you haven't got the sun in Leo, you find that a lot of actors have like Venus in Leo, or there's a Leo connection, because it does rule. It's about the theater, isn't it?
Yeah, you need Leo to take center stage. You've got Leo ascendant. My ruling planet Mars is in Leo, and look at us, we're doing a podcast and on video. You've got to have some Leo, I think, to be able to step forward. It really helps, doesn't it?
And we're coordinating in orange today, which was accidental, but there you go.
Orange, color of the sun. Leo color.
Leo colors. Yes. So, I think that the other thing that Leo, I find, Leo and Venus together say luxury to me, and, luxury stuff. And I think that Venus in Leo retrograde may be about casting off some luxury. And by the way, one of the reasons we're really focusing on this quite a lot is that she's retrograde in Leo now from the 23rd of July until the 4th of September. So this is a very long period, and for the whole period that we're covering in this podcast, which is 20, is that Leo
23rd of July. It's incredible. Venus turns retrograde in Leo, and not long after. It's about 20 minutes after the sun moves into Leo. So it's really Venus retrograde in Leo is really part of this Leo season.
It's been
very interesting.
And I do think that there's something in here, and shall we move into the month ahead?
Let's talk about Venus retrograde, I think, because it is
the whole month. It's so fascinating. But all that Leo stuff makes a square, which is a hard aspect, which creates difficulty but dynamism, with Jupiter and Uranus in Taurus. So these are two major planets in Taurus, the sign of Venus, right? So that's the Venus ruled sign of Taurus. And these are both planets of liberation and change in sign, which is to do with Venusian things of money, beauty, and in this case of Taurus, creature comforts. Then you get Venus in Leo, and we're talking about luxury, the luxurious side of that, because Leo is royal, it's a luxurious sign. And I think that we are having a cost of living crisis, and this is about on a personal level. I think a lot of people will be thinking about what luxuries can I get rid of.
Yeah,
that's simple.
I agree. Yeah, I mean, Venus is square Jupiter 3 times, square Uranus 3 times. I mean, during this season, there's a Venus-Uranus square on August the 9th and a Venus-Jupiter square on August the 22nd, when Venus is retrograde. So it is having to, retrograde planets, you're having to rethink things. You're having to sort of review, reassess. And Venus is the planet that's about love. It's also the planet that's to do with money, and it's the planet to do with beauty as well. I have to say, I kind of, because I want to have a small tattoo done, which I've been wanting to do for some time. And there's a tattoo artist that I like who had a flash sale on, and I was all gung-ho for booking it. Then I realized it was going to be when Venus was retrograde, and I thought, hang on a minute. Astrologer, don't do that. I'll probably regret it. So I've got back to her and said, I'll get back to you in September. We'll discuss it again then. I just thought, no, it's not the time to be doing it.
You don't want Mercury retrograde either with that.
No.
Well, Virgo is kind of good because, Mercury in Virgo is kind of good, and the Sun in Virgo will be kind of good because those are about precision and detail and being and good craftsmanship.
Yes. So it's after September the 15th, actually, that I can do it.
I would, and I would do it when Venus is in Virgo myself, if I were going to do that, because it's very good for craft.
True. So for anyone else wanting to have a tattoo done, think timing.
Like that. I mean, that would be not till October, actually.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you're going to get stuck with this thing permanently, you want to make a very good decision about timing. Yes. So where were we going with this? Oh, Venus to do with beauty. It's interesting. Yeah. I wonder if there's going to be a lot of, oh my God, I really regret that plastic surgery I had with this Venus retrograde, Well,
it is. I mean, whenever anyone asks, that's Venus retrograde is really not the time to do it. It's not the time to do it. It's only once every 18 months that it comes around. So you've got plenty of time to do it, but just don't do it now. And also, it's going to be interesting for relationships. I already, I've got some friends who are kind of questioning relationships. Let's put it that way. So rather than when Venus is retrograde, it's not a time to make the big decisions, but maybe take a step back, think about what you want and need when it comes to love, slow the pace down, and use the Venus retrograde to kind of explore and inquire what you need and want when it comes to love and relationships. But yeah, it's often taking a step back, isn't it?
And I would say particularly, Libra, Taurus, who are ruled by Venus, definitely, even though it's not exactly in a relationship part of the sky for them, but still, this is going to be probably affect them more. Venus, Libra, and Taurus, you're ruled by Venus. And when Venus goes retrograde, you may just generally want to take a little step back, want to take care of, do a lot of self-care, allow yourself to go into the dungeon, which you kind of need to do every now and then. Give yourself a kind of a break from, having to do stuff. And also you may be reassessing relationships. I agree with that. And I think in this case, it's particularly so because the nodes have moved, the nodes have shifted. And the nodes have shifted from Taurus Scorpio, where they were until the mid-July, and they had been for 18 months, into Libra Aries. And Libra is, so now Venus is ruling the South Node, which is about letting go quite often with the South Node, or publishing. If you're publishing your romance novel, now's the time you should be polishing it. it's like it's the point of dissemination, or letting go is the simple way of putting it. But dissemination can also mean throwing the seeds out into the universe, right?
Yeah.
And that is now in Libra, which is the sign of relationships for everyone.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But I think that this Venus retrograde will be particularly affecting those Librans, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, I do. And I think it's, having the North Node in Aries, South Node in Libra is a time to, think about putting yourself first in relationships, where you're getting lost in relationship, which I think is something that can happen a lot, losing, one's identity if you become too closely kind of connected with someone. And it's a similar, I think it was interesting again with Venus turning retrograde in Leo and then the sun moving into Leo. That seems to me to be a similar theme. It's a reminder that, you've got to put yourself first. You've got to make sure, you've got to find your happiness within yourself before finding it within a relationship. It's a real kind of, it's a know thyself, isn't it? It's the oracle in Delphi where I went in February, know thyself. I think the astrology this month is about finding yourself again, finding what gives you happiness, what you love, and having that coming from, your heart and you, rather than trying to find it in the other. It seems like a very common theme moving forwards, and particularly for Leo and Aquarius, I would say, with this, with that opposite axis of Leo and Aquarius.
Yeah, and it's interesting, actually. And I think there's another, I agree with that completely. And there's another way of looking at it too, in terms of love, which is opening your heart to love. If you've been closed off, opening yourself to relationships. Because, a lot of us go through life closing ourselves to relationships and not just experimenting,
Yeah.
Again, it's that dissemination thing. Throw your seeds onto the water. Scatter your seeds in the God. Where's my metaphor gone? You know what I mean? Spread it about a bit, guys. But
seeds throwing going on.
Go on dates, basically. If you're go on a lot of dates, especially if you're like a Libra, be free to experiment. Don't be clenched, unclenched.
Yeah. And that's, that is, I think that's interesting too. I mean, someone who now lives on, I live on my own, work on my own, and it's, you need human connection. Being on your own too much just isn't good for you. So Aries ascendant, again, with all this going on in Leo, it is, entertainment, dates, connection. It's having fun as well.
Wouldn't you say that one of the things about a Venus retrograde is often to reconnect socially?
Yeah.
It's an old cliche, but it's a good one, that you connect with, you reaffirm some social connections, and you also drop some people. I mean, that's also often the case with Venus retrograde.
Yeah. I mean, interesting, because, I've just gone back home. I went up to Blackpool, which is where I'm from, in the Lake District. I stayed with, this was in the shadow of Venus retrograde. I mean, literally just before this podcast. Stayed with an old friend of mine who I knew as a teenager. So there was that reconnection. And then Blackpool it's a Leo city, which isn't surprising because, the city of 1,000 dreams. I mean, it's just constant. It's entertainment. It's fun. And I did think, wow, this is really the right thing to be doing at this time in Cancer season, when the sun was in Cancer and Venus getting ready to turn retrograde in Leo. It was that, and it was lovely to go back and make that kind of reconnection as well. Perfect. Feel very invigorated and revitalized by doing it as well.
Yeah, I'm going to be seeing someone I haven't seen since I was 15 on the day that Venus turns retrograde, which I'm very excited by. Yeah. In Switzerland. So she's been there all along, lurking around.
And that's, I think Venus retrograde in Leo as well is a time to do more of what you love. It's like, have fun, go on holiday, hang out, reconnect with your kids or people you knew as a child. that's the positive side of this Venus retrograde. It is lovely on some way in Leo, isn't it? Yes, some relationships can go tits up and take a step back, but there's enjoyment to be had in it as well.
And go deeper into the enjoyment, and also I think, for certain people, there's no question that a Venus retrograde can deepen a relationship. You get more involved, you go deeper, you go down to another layer. Or you may be having a secret affair, of course. That's the Venus retrograde thing. But it's literally an underground affair, especially, I think, interestingly, with Aries rising, that looks like the case with a retrograde in Leo. And also what it also means, because of the retrograde, is that for certain signs you're going to be having Venus transits for a long time this year, and that's in itself, that is quite lucky. And that would be Sagittarius, Aries, and Leo in particular are getting that fiery Venus, and it's a good thing.
It's the lesser benefic, isn't it? Jupiter's the greater benefic, the best planet. Venus is the second best, so to speak. So lovely things can come via Venus for sure.
Especially things to do with, all what we've mentioned, with love and money, etc. You may also find it's a finding money in the attic kind of, or finding that your painting is actually worth a lot of money. Don't go fogging your granny's knitting collection just yet, because it may turn out to be worth more than you thought. So that's a real thing with Venus retrograde, is bargain. Some people will be finding bargains of secondhand stuff, old things, and some people will be losing money. I keep on thinking to myself, speaking of all this, all that stuff in water and this Venus retrograde, I keep on thinking, turn off the dripping taps. Venus retrograde, in terms of cash. Cash spending. What are the dripping taps? And this is a really, really good time to do that. And if you think of that in terms of money, but then also emotionally, turn off those dripping taps as well. Those things that are just draining you little. Social dripping taps. That's the biggest thing.
Nice analogy. I like that. So, I mean, should we have a look at the first lunation coming up? Because, I mean, we can talk a bit more about Venus as we go along, because she's so important. But we've got a new moon and a full moon taking place. I think it's the full moon that comes first this month, isn't it? On August the 1st. Moon in Aquarius, Sun in Leo, opposite the Sun in Leo. Because both the full and new moon this month, they're sort of pulling in these big themes, particularly the Jupiter, what's going on with Jupiter and Uranus in Taurus, the money sign. And just to say that, next year in April 2024, there will be a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, which takes place once every 14 years, which, we're heading towards that now with those two planets in the money star sign. So that's going to be interesting to see what goes on around then. But there's something about the astrology now that we're perhaps getting some ideas what this is going to be about, maybe on a personal level, perhaps also collectively. And this full moon on August the 1st, I mean, the Sun and Moon are both at 9 degrees of Leo and Aquarius, and Jupiter is at 13 Taurus. So that's the T-square that's going on. This full moon really is triggered by Jupiter as well, which is, this Jupiter squares can be fun, over the top, hedonistic. Again, there's this sense of, wow, let's get out there and have a good time. And full moons are a time of celebration. So, do something special on or around this full moon.
Yeah, I think it's a big one, actually. There's just a sense of exuberance about this full moon, and joyfulness, especially for Leos themselves, who are having quite a torrid time in some ways. They're having there's so much happening for Leos. There's so many things starting and finishing. So I think Taurus also, this feeling of like, just let it all hang out at the full moon, let it explode. Also Aquarians, this is your full moon on the 1st of August. Is the full moon is in Aquarius. You only get it once this year. Normally we only get it once a year as well, but this is your full moon, and it's a party because Aquarius is also the sign of connection with other people, with groups. Yeah. So I think it would be an ideal full moon to be in a group.
Or possibly for Aquarius getting together with family as well, with Taurus is your family home sector, opening up your home, having a big party around yours, or reconnecting with the clan, with the tribe during this full moon for Aquarius.
Yeah, and for Taurus, the full moon itself is actually in your career sector. So there may be, some kind of, an office party. There may be some kind of bonus thing happening to do with your career, your public, or your public. Interesting, literally your public. But also, so I have to say I like this full moon. I think it's interesting the way it hooks up with the air signs as well, who are kind of, there's not much in air at the moment. And it's nice that there's a full moon in air. So the air signs are all floating around, and then this full moon happens and it brings something to a kind of point. Yeah.
And Virgo, the star sign Virgo is kicking in, isn't it, during this full moon already, because Mercury's moved into Virgo, which happens towards the end of July, on the 28th of July. Mercury is going to be in Virgo for an unusually long time because Mercury will turn retrograde on the 23rd of August. So Mercury and Virgo, a star sign it likes. There's precision there, joining Mars in Virgo. You already talked a bit about Virgo, the sort of craft design side of it. But there's a lot going on in Virgo. So, I kind of wonder as well what's happening for the Virgos. This Venus, when you were talking about affairs, this Venus retrograde is in a very private, secretive sector. So it could be something going on that side, something you're working on that's a bit secretive or a bit hidden. And the moon in Aquarius in your work and health sector too. So there could be some project that you're getting your head down, writing project or creative project as well. And that's another thing that the Venus retrograde in Leo is good for, isn't it? To lose yourself in a creative project, blank out your diary. So you've got this time just to dive in deep to something and bring something new into being as well. Another way that the Venus retrograde in Leo could play out.
I'm just thinking about a very dear Virgo friend of mine who is moving house, of course, with Mars in Virgo. When Mars goes into your sign, you often will do some kind of very active house move or something like that. But she's moving into a haunted house. Hence, and so it's interesting that she's got all that 12th stuff in Leo is in this hidden place of haunting, actually. And I also think that, and also is the Venus retrograde. She's going to have to do something about the haunting, I think, which also is quite a good thing to do with Venus retrograde, because Venus is going into the underworld to go and bring some light, because this is a sort of Leo underworld. She's carrying a torch down, like Vasilisa the Beautiful does to Baba Yaga's house, So I'm thinking about my Virgo friend who's going to have to do that in August. And she's going to have to be very brave, which is okay, because she's got Mars in Virgo. And we have a long Virgo season in the same way that we had a long Leo season because of Mars going in early and then being followed by a retrograde by another planet. So it prolongs the season, and it does mean that Cancer just got a sort of blip this year. There's just a little bit of Cancer season, but it's been overlapped on both on this side by everything rushing into Leo and then going into Virgo as well.
Yeah, and I mean, just kind of, thinking about Cancer, also Capricorn, perhaps. I mean, it's, you've got Venus retrograde in money sectors of your chart, both of you. So I think for both those star signs, this period is a good time to reassess finances, to review finances, look at what you're spending. I mean, that's quite a theme for everyone, as we've discussed already, with the Venus retrograde square Jupiter and Uranus in Taurus, but particularly, I think for those two star signs, that's an area for review during this Venus retrograde for sure.
And not always bad. I mean, I noticed that in the States, Biden has forgiven a lot of student debt.
Yes.
Which is going to have a big impact for a lot of people. Very, very helpful. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I think that's, partly this Venus retrograde making this square to Jupiter and Uranus, which are these planets of liberation. There's liberation from debt for some people.
Yeah, and as you said earlier, Venus, before the podcast, when we were talking, Leo's the star sign of children.
Yeah.
So, it is around sort of children, younger generation. That's a lovely way that this is playing out. But also for some people, it would be a time to, reconsider spending finances on your children as well. I think there's in England, the student loans are changing, and it's going to make it more difficult, I think, for some kids to be going to uni. So I'm sure some people will be looking at that as well over this summer period.
Well, and also as results come in this country.
Yeah.
I think with Mercury retrograde and Venus retrograde, results are, I can't remember, they're mid-August at some point. But it's in the shadow of the Mercury retrograde already, which begins at the beginning of August, pretty much.
Yeah, it does.
Middle of a Venus retrograde. I can see that maybe quite a lot of people are not going to get things are not going to turn out how people expect.
Yeah.
And that's to do with the youth, young people. And Virgo is all about exams, really, about tests and measurement. It's a sign, one of the signs of measurement.
Yeah.
So people will be having to reassess their plans for what they're doing next year.
Yeah, and I think it's a big theme of the summer. Don't expect things to work out the way you thought they were going to. I mean, it's a time to be quite flexible, quite spontaneous. Look at what's possible, what's not. It's quite extraordinary to have this sort of retrograde theme now running through for the next couple of months.
Well, and it's also interesting. The beginning of this year, which we talked about it at the beginning of this year, there was a huge long run of many months where everything was direct, which is actually quite unusual in astrology to have everything going direct. And now we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 planets in retrograde, including Chiron. 5 planets retrograde, and I think Uranus will be going retrograde sometime in August, won't it? So we're getting into this much more thing. The brakes are coming on, and the readjustments after the helter-skelter of earlier in the year, the readjustments are happening now.
Yeah.
Would say the corrections.
Corrections
are happening now. And it's, corrections are a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Both Uranus and Jupiter will turn retrograde during Virgo season.
Yeah.
So August, September. So yeah, real retrograde theme, time to, put on the brakes, slow down. Often with retrogrades, it's really good to get a different perspective on things. And also I'd say that particularly for Sagittarius, also maybe Gemini, take yourself off somewhere different so you can get a different perspective, look at things, outside of the box, do some lateral thinking as well.
So do you want to look at the new moon?
Let's look at the new moon too, which takes place on August the 16th, obviously in Leo, as it's Leo season. And just to say that a few days before that, there is the Sun-Venus conjunction in Leo, and that takes place on August the 13th. So Sun conjunct Venus retrograde, August the 13th, and that's exactly halfway through the retrograde phase. And that can sometimes, things can shift then. There can be, a new insight or a new way of looking at things. Venus is really close to the sun, that brings light, illumination, clarity. So you may get some insight about what's going on around love, money in particular, during that conjunction. And they're still at the new moon. I mean, the sun and moon are 23 degrees Leo. Venus is retrograde at 18 degrees Leo. So some insight that comes in on 13th of August, you may want to, reassess, start something new in a way, look at things from a different perspective on this new moon on the 16th of August.
Yeah, it's kind of an extraordinary little run there, isn't it? So there's the new moon, then there's the Sun-Venus conjunction, the new moon, and then Venus squares Jupiter in that mid, just before the sun changes signs, essentially. There's quite a lot of reassessment there, and the new moon that's what it's about. It's about that Sun Venus retrograde conjunction, and also the sun at the at the new moon, that actually squares Uranus, doesn't it, in Taurus?
Exactly. Uranus is at 23 Taurus.
Yeah, and it's a big glob of change, in fact, and deciding to make some change. And I think one of the things, the sort of general advice with this month is to see what happens and go with the change. Don't make any drastic decisions. You may have to make some. And I think things will start to become clear after the 13th of August and at that new moon.
It's not drastic change, but it is reorient your compass, isn't it? It's kind of,
it's reorient your compass and be prepared for drastic change, I think, as well. It's that all this stuff squaring Uranus does suggest, it's a catalyst. Uranus is a catalyst, kind of turning point here. A lot of people, and again, I think the obvious kind of, what's the word, analogy, the obvious sort of thing is partly, we talk about these exams for students, the results coming out and having to change your plans. And I actually think that's quite clearly written in the stars around that mid, because that's exactly when they're all coming out, all these results.
And interesting, this new moon, just thinking for Scorpio and Pisces, I mean, it's for Scorpio, it's your career vocation sector. And for Pisces, it's your work sector. So for the water signs in particular, including Cancer probably, it's time to look at the basics of life. It's time to look at, the work and money and the practical stuff as well, and maybe getting fresh insights around that. So it's quite an interesting one for both those, and also Mars in this Virgo energy. It's interesting. There's whatever's going on in Leo is clashing with Jupiter and Uranus in Taurus, but those planets in Virgo, Mercury and Mars, are making nice aspects to Jupiter and Taurus. So there is some kind of trying to keep things steady. Looking at the long-term picture, maybe looking at the practicalities, working things out during this retrograde phase.
And you could say, I'm not saying that Leos are all egotistical, but it is the sign of ego, know. And new moon is the dark of the moon. Also, just for those of you who follow Lilith makes an exact conjunction to this new moon. So this is Black Moon Lilith at the dark of the moon. This is incredibly witchy moon, and I think there's something quite witchy about Leo anyway. This is a very powerful moon in terms of, I don't like to use the word sort of dark energy, but in terms of connecting to wild energy, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
And things being not how you expect at all, because that's a very Lilith thing. So what we have, looking at this lineup, we've got Venus, Sun, Moon, Lilith in a very tight conjunction. And that's Venus retrograde, which is also a dark feminine energy. I mean,
Yeah.
as you know, I kind of get worried about sort of gendering things too much.
Mm.
But seriously, there's something about this that is extremely kind of potent. If
Yeah.
you're wanting to reach deeper,
Yes.
there's a kind of, it's very kind of sexy, I think, actually, this new moon. There's something about it that there's a sort of and there's something also in here about breaking taboos, going somewhere where, without fear.
Mm. Mm. And the word that keeps coming to mind for me while you're talking is magician.
Yeah.
Something magical about this new moon. And that is, I kind of think it fits with the Venus going retrograde. She's warrior woman, Venus, in mythology, and that often gets forgotten. And she goes down into the depths, and that's where the hidden riches are. And it's said that during that midpoint, which is August the 13th, she then starts to gather strength. She's going to emerge stronger and more powerful and ready to kind of go back out into the world, which will come in, September. So there's something magical about that, something that's sort of gathering or collecting. And exactly what you're saying, it's a potent energy, isn't it? It's very creative, incredibly creative. What's sort of growing, being sourced as well during this new moon?
It's really prolific. I mean, one of the things, this new moon is precisely squaring that Uranus and Taurus. It's exact. And that's the magician, is that Uranus and Taurus. Is the Uranian energy is the magician energy. But it's coming up against this dark, this magical. So the magician is the conjurer, is the magician in the tarot cards, right? With the many, the dexterous, the juggler. This is all kind of Uranian stuff. The person who gets fire from the mountain, right? It's Promethean energy. Comes into contact with that new moon. It would be, if it weren't for the Venus retrograde, I would say it'd be an incredible time to kind of launch something a few days later.
Yeah.
But so I think if you were launching something like, a witchcraft channel or something like that, that would work quite well, even though it's a Venus retrograde, because it's about going deeper, and it's about bringing out something that has been hidden or suppressed. That's where I'm getting from this actually now, is the release of something suppressed happens after this new moon, right? So it won't be might not be on the day, it'll be like the day after, the release of something suppressed. And that can be something very, very creative. So I think it's a really, really exciting new moon. Actually.
Yeah. And a really good time to be working on something in private, kind of honing it, growing it. But yeah, I don't think launching it. I really don't think launching it, because of Venus retrograde and then Mercury in its shadow, and Mercury turns retrograde on the 23rd of August. There's going to be some delay or something, and you're better off waiting actually till September the 15th, mid-September. Venus turns direct September the 4th, Mercury turns direct September the 15th. That will be the date to kind of get ready to put out your masterpiece or launch that something.
But you have the ideas at this point.
Yeah.
I agree about not launching it because of the retrogrades, which is a pity, because if it weren't for the retrogrades, I would be saying that's an incredibly potent new moon to be starting something just after. And it may be something internal. This is the other thing, is that we always sort of think, launching I don't know, podcast, right? But maybe it's something, an internal seed that you start.
Yeah.
So although you're not launching something, you're writing the first lines of your epic poem in praise of the mother goddess or whatever, that you're digging around in there in this creative manure. Creative, well, maybe manure, maybe soil.
Yeah. Soil. Fertile. It's fertile.
It's
Well,
more,
yours fertile, actually.
yours more of a sort of Scorpio metaphor.
Yeah.
Soil is more of a Taurian metaphor. So it is like in the soil. There's
Yeah. And it's alchemy, actually, isn't it? It's turning, something base into something gold, almost, with this Leo analogy there. It's an alchemical moment.
The Leo Taurus energy, because Leo is gold and Taurus is earth, right? So it's turning base metal into gold.
Yeah.
Truly. I mean, there is a dangerous element to this, I think, not necessarily personally, but I would, there is a kind of warlike feel. I mean, the other thing that's happening is that Mercury and Mars are getting closer and closer. They're working together in Virgo, and Mars is the god of war, and there's something pretty warlike about that Venus retrograde. Also about Lilith, so we could watch the news for that too. And also the fact that the North Node is now in Aries, which is a sign of war. Yeah.
Who or what is gathering power behind the scenes? It's a time to be a bit. And again, with retrograde planets, that's, it's be savvy, read between the lines, pay attention to the detail as well. Don't miss out on things as well. So exciting month, Christina.
It's I would say it's a potent, powerful. That's just tautological, isn't it? It's a potent month where there is magic, and where being practical is useful. But don't be rushed into anything. Work on the craft of it and take time off. I know that's a dumb thing to say in August. Of course you should take time off, but really, really think about what that Venus retrograde in Leo means. Let go, and you don't have to do a luxury holiday. Just
chill out.
Chill out.
And don't expect everything to go according to plan. Be willing to, shift direction, reorient your compass as well during this month ahead. I think that's going to be really important to come through this quite retrograde phase that we're going on, and notice, look beneath the surface, what's hidden as well.
Things will not go according to plan. So you may have to have plans A, B, C, and D. And F.
Alrighty.
Okay, great.
Take care, everybody. We'll see you next month. Bye.
Bye.